Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Gopi Jana Ballava Girivaradhare Gopi Jana Ballava Girivaradhare Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachare Yamunatira Vanachare Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Gopi Jana Ballava Girivaradhare Gopi Jana Ballava Girivaradhare Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachare Yamunatira Vanachare Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Jai Mishtavad Paramahansa Paravrajak Charis Status Srimad. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki. ISKCON's founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath ki. Shri Giri Govardhan ki. Shri Caitanya Mahaprabhu ki. Sankirtan Yagya ki. Go Premanande. All glories to the Samo devotees. All glories to the Samo devotees. All glories to the Samo devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 23. Maharaj Prithu's going back home. Text 13. Is that correct? 13? Well, yeah, the battery's running out. Oh, gosh. We will do battery prayers. Yes, right. So it's verse 13. Is that correct? Yes. Evam sa vira pravara samyojyatmanam atmane brahma bhuto dridham Kale Tatyaja Svam Kalevaram Evam Savira Pravara Samyojatmanam Atmane Brahma Bhuto Dridham Kale Tatyaja Swam Kalevaram Evam Savira Pravara Samyojyatmanam Atmane Brahma Bhuto Dridham Kale Tatyaja Swam Kalevaram Evam Savira Pravara Samyojatmanam Atmane Brahma Bhuto Dritam Kale Tatyaja Swam Kalevaram. Ladies. Yes, okay. Evam, thus, sa, he, Vira Pravara, the chief of the heroes, Samyojya, applying, Atmanam, mind, Atmane, unto the super soul, Brahma Bhuta, being liberated, Dridham, firmly, Kale, in due course of time, Tatyaja, gave up, Swam, own, Kalevaram, body. Translation. In due course of time, when Prithu Maharaj was to give up his body, he fixed his mind firmly upon the lotus feet of Krishna, and thus, completely situated on the Brahmabhuta platform, he gave up the material body. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. According to a Bengali proverb, whatever spiritual progress one makes in life will be tested at the time of death. In Bhagavad Gita chapter 8 verse 6 it is also confirmed, Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyachat yante kalevaram tam tameva iti kontaya sadatad bhava bhavita. Well, yes. Anyway, that's saying, chapter 8, verse 6. It's just saying whatever state of being you're in at the ante, at the end of life, then you sada, tadbhavata, sadbhava, that whatever that state is, bhava meaning state in that context, you'll achieve, you'll just go to. Those who are practicing Krishna consciousness know that their examination will be held at the time of death. If one can remember Krishna at death, he's immediately transferred to Goloka Vrindavan or Krishna Loka, and thus his life becomes successful. Prithu Maharaj, by the grace of Krishna, could understand that the end of his life was near, and thus he became very jubilant and proceeded to completely give up his body on the Brahmabhuta stage, as referred to in 4th Canto, chapter 30, verse 20. Yes, on the Brahmabhuta stage, by practicing the yogic process, it is thoroughly described in the following verses how one can voluntarily give up this body and return home back to Godhead. The yogic process practiced by Prithu Maharaj at the time of death accelerates the giving up of this body while one is in sound health physically and mentally. Every devotee desires to give up the body while it is sound physically and mentally. This desire was also expressed by King Kulashekar in his Mukundamala Stotra. Krishna tvadiya padapankaja panjarantam adyaiva me vishatu manasa rajahangsa prana prayana samaye kapavata pitai kantava rodana vido smaranam kutaste. That is Mukundamala Stotra, verse 33. King Kulashekar wanted to give up his body while in a healthy state, and he thus prayed to Krishna to let him die immediately while he was in good health and while his mind was sound. When a man dies, he is generally overpowered by mucus and bile, and thus he chokes. Since it is very difficult to vibrate any sound while choking, it is simply by Krishna's grace that one can chant Hare Krishna at the time of death. However, by situating oneself in the muktasana position, a yogi can immediately give up his body and go to whatever planet he desires. A perfect yogi can give up his body whenever he desires through the practice of yoga. Evam savira pravara samyojyatmanam atmani brahmabhuto dridham kale tadyajaswam kalevaram. In due course of time, when Prithu Maharaj was to give up his body, he fixed his mind firmly upon the lotus feet of Krishna, and thus, completely situated on the Brahmabhuta platform, he gave up the material body. Namah Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastucha Dejatarane Vanchikapaturibhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Yes, well, Srila Prabhupada and Scripture from time to time express or explain that this life, these lifetimes which each one of us is in, our own particular lifetime, but every person's lifetime is really an educational process. It's really an educational process, and in every educational process, at the end there's a test. Usually in the meantime, there's also a number of tests as the course develops, but then there's the final exam usually, and then that has some like final sort of importance to it. And if you fail the final exam, then normally you'd have to come back and do it again, depending on what it may be. In some cases, maybe the entire process, but usually at least part of it, you'd have to come back and do it again, and then hopefully you would pass, but who knows? So yes, that's the case here, and that's what Srila Prabhupada is referring to, the Bengali proverb. Whatever spiritual progress you've made in life will be tested at the time of death. Like we said, though, they're usually in educational processes, particularly if they're kind of big, over some years, educational processes. There are tests from time to time. It's not just in a big educational program, it's not just final test and that's it. But there's all sorts of tests actually along the way. Even sometimes you have to write an essay every so often, and then there's a test, and all these types of things are there in educational programs. And that's there in Krishna consciousness. It's definitely there in Krishna consciousness. Sometimes we might not notice it, or we might not think of these things which happen, these tests from time to time, these tests. We might not think of them as being part of an a greater educational program. We may think of them that they're just things that just happen sometimes. But actually every one it's basically, the whole program, like any educational program, is very systematically organized. And it's not just haphazard, you just have a test sometimes, and sometimes you just suddenly must write an essay or something like that. It's very systematic. And it's systematic because they've been following this educational program, and people have been trying to achieve the result of this educational program for years, for many years. Anyway, this is sort of, common knowledge, or it's just common sense. We've all been to school and so on, and we've all been through it. And yes, it is systematic. It's not haphazard. Generally, it's not haphazard at all. It's just highly systematic to bring you step by step to the final point. And at that point, the final point, then you're really tested on the whole process. And in this case, whatever spiritual progress you made through this life is tested at the time of death. Yeah, so Krishna consciousness works like this. There are tests, but they're all given in systematic ways. They're relevant tests. Normally when you're doing an educational program, it's not just, haphazard, that suddenly they just test you on something else. No, they test you on what, where you should be at right now. And this is what happens in Krishna consciousness. But like we said, there may be a tendency, there is a tendency amongst many to feel that the tests are just sort of kind of random, more or less. They're just happening at certain times in certain ways. But it's not really like that, because Krishna is highly intelligent. Of course, Krishna is not just highly intelligent. He embodies the entirety of intelligence. And Krishna knows each one of us better than we know ourselves. So we may not understand at a certain point of time that it would be relevant, helpful in specific terms to be tested in a certain way at a particular specific time. But Krishna knows, and therefore Krishna arranges things like that. And there's a saying, famous material saying, nothing is as certain as death and taxes. So in Krishna consciousness, you could say nothing is as certain as that you're going to get tested. Those who regard Sri Radha Radhanath Sri Giri Govardhan Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai, those who are not thinking of how this is all going on systematically and intelligently structured by Lord Krishna, who is just so fantastically intelligent, it's completely inconceivable, that when a test comes, a devotee may think, oh, when will this test finish? I want it to finish. And when it does finish, it's like, oh, great, it's finished. But if we understand that Krishna, in his intelligence, and not just intelligence, but very sincere concern for our well-being and our proper development towards that point of the final test, then yes, we should really try and see these things, that Krishna is trying to test me here, or is testing me here in this way or that. And if it's not clear, because we're not so bright, let's face it, if it's not clear to us that, oh, Krishna is testing me on this, some particular attachment or something, misconception that I have, so I must now focus like that. If it's not clear enough to us how we're being tested and what we're meant to be getting out of it, then what to do? Well, we must pray to Krishna, because he knows, and not only does he know, but he designed it in that way for us, for our development in some particular way. So yes, this is very important. Prayer, of course, in general, prayer is very important, because through prayer, it's particularly by prayer that we get specific types of mercy in terms of what we may feel is relevant to us. At least that's one part of prayer. And certainly prayer does not mean to make demands and start treating Krishna like he doesn't know what he's doing or something like that, or we know better than he does. We should know he knows the best. And therefore, if it's not clear, then we should pray to Krishna and ask Krishna, please help me to understand what I should learn here. And we should tell Krishna that, if you reveal it to me, I promise I will do my very best to focus in that way and develop in the relevant way in terms of the particular test. This is all very important in Krishna consciousness because, well, like we said, it is an educational process, and as with any educational process, it's systematic. Yeah, so, and of course we are not that systematic, and we're prone to so many shortcomings and not being very intelligent. So we need help with these tests. One of the main points when there are tests, depends on the test, but generally one of the main points is that in order to get through this test successfully, not just survive it, but to get through it positively, successfully, and come out knowing that I've actually learned something which will help me with my ongoing process, progress in Krishna consciousness. Not only that, but we have to recognize that Krishna is being merciful. The tests are Krishna's kindness. It's not Krishna being unpleasant. Yeah, which happens in some cases. Apparently we hear that people are at school or university or something, and the teacher decides he or she doesn't like them. Yeah, and so they end up failing an exam which, they feel sure they couldn't have failed, and so they make some protest, and like that, maybe it gets remarked. Anyway, many of you know about these things. Or maybe, I've read of occasions where the teacher, particularly if the particular student involved, if the teacher has his or her eyes on them, then the student may know they have not done well, but then suddenly find, oh, I passed the test. How could that be? Anyway, these things happen too. Maybe some of you have experienced these things directly, but we've read of them. They definitely happen in this very fallen, conditioned material world. But Krishna's not like that. And Krishna is, first thing you could say that we should understand about Krishna is that Krishna is nice. Krishna is a good guy. And he's just through and through 108% or more. He's just super nice, and he's never going to do anything which is at all like vindictive or just, nasty, that sort of thing. He's never going to do it. And we need to cultivate that consciousness, because when the tests come, and if we are in our material state of consciousness, or even say to some degree in a material state of consciousness, then the tendency is there that we may start to blame Krishna, even if it's just slightly, or just, accuse Krishna. Why did you do this to me? Or that sort of thing. Prabhupada made the point about the Second World War, that in Germany, because in the end, Germany got just totally devastated in the last 6 months of the war or something like that. It just they had no air force. It had ceased to exist. And so, the good old Allies were just flying overhead every single night. And they said, I read once years ago, that they were dropping so many bombs, and all that the bombs were doing was making the rubble bounce, if you get the idea. Everything's already just rubble. There's nothing to destroy. No buildings or anything. There's just none left. So all the bombs do is make the rubble bounce. And so many people, particularly in those last months, so many people lost their lives. So Prabhupada made the point that in the Second World War, in Germany, many women became atheists because their husbands, fathers, brothers, friends, male, like that, so many of them died. Just so many of them died. They were being forced to make last stands against the overwhelming force of the opposing army, and the opposing army was just on a roll. Victory was obviously just coming just now, And so many of them were told just, fight to the death for the fatherland or the motherland. And they were killed. So Prabhupada made that point, that therefore so many women in Germany became atheists by the end of the war because they had been praying that may our, whoever it is, male person come back alive, but so many of them didn't come back alive. Yeah. So, yes. So we will be tested. That's a point. We will be tested. Don't worry. You get through a test, sometimes the tendency is think, I got through that test, and to somehow have some feeling that that's the end of the tests. It's not. In one sense, there's no end to the tests. Even like the greatest devotees, Srimati Radharani and the gopis, we know that Krishna left them in the middle of the rasa dance. First of all, he went off with Srimati Radharani, so the other gopis were it was a big test. How to deal with this, just being, you could say, on a certain level, abandoned by Krishna. But then he even left Radharani. So, in other words, there's not going to be really an end to the tests coming. And we must try our best to not let there be an end to our capacity to sort of deal with the tests and, keep going and not become negative. Because material consciousness means, what does material consciousness mean? Well, many things, but one of the things it means is that when you're sort of not doing well and life is just, not going well, there's this huge tendency to become depressed and become sort of accuse and find fault in different ways with what one feels is contributing to your being down. Yes, this is the material world, and that is one of the main things. It's really one of the main things. So anyway, here, the point that Prabhupada's really focusing on the most, actually, is that what are we going to do at the end? What are we going to do at the end? Are we going to be ready? How ready will we be? Will we be ready enough? And we must make every effort to become ready enough to meet the time of death, because it's the final exam. And when you're taking any educational course, you have to make a particular point of being ready for the final test, even if you pass the other tests in the meantime. So the point is, one has to be able to remember Krishna at the time of death. But it's not just so easy. Just remember Krishna. Oh, okay, I'll remember Krishna. It's not so easy. Particularly in old age. This is what Prabhupada is talking about, and he refers to King Kulashekar and his famous prayer, which Prabhupada would really often quote and even sing. There is, at the particular point, there's a link here in this Bhagavatam verse to this particular prayer of King Kulashekar. Krishna tvadiya pada pankaja panjarantam adyaiva me vishatu manasa rajahangsa prana prayana samaye kapavata pitai Kantava rodana vido smaranam kutaste, which means, this is from the Mukundamala Stotra, verse 33, O Lord Krishna, at this moment, let the royal swan of my mind enter the tangled stems of the lotus of your feet. How will it be possible for me to remember you at the time of death, when my throat will be choked up with mucus, bile, and air? Yeah, Rajahamsa, Manasa Rajahamsa. My mind, I want it to be there like a Rajahamsa, like a king swan, royal swan. Because royal swans, what they do, they dive to take liquid from the stems of the lotus, which are under water, and they're down in the ground at the bottom of the water. So that's what swans do. It's one thing they do, which is kind of unique to swans. Other birds, even like aquatic, semi-aquatic birds, they don't do that, really go down to the bottom and take some nectar from the bottom of the stems, where they're like at the richest point, because that's where they're getting their sustenance from the ground at the bottom. Yes, so he's praying like that, King Kulashekha, that at this moment, it's a quite unusual state of mind, but at this moment he's saying, now I am healthy and, I'm not old and just, battling even to walk or something like that. I'm fit. I'm at, some decent point in my life, and physically, mentally I'm alert, physically I'm strong. So what is he saying? He's saying, let me die now, please. Isn't that an interesting thought for prayer? Let me die now, because, I'll be able to deal with it much better. Whatever would be the best state for me to be in when the time of death comes, I'm in it right now. So let me just die now, so I can remember Krishna, and I won't be in this sort of, devastated physical condition already, where, as the verse mentions, my throat will be choked up by mucus, bile, and air. This is apparently something that happens with people who are just coming to the time of death. Just slowly the body is just kind of turning off, step by step. Then mucus, bile, and air gathers in the throat, and therefore it becomes very difficult to chant or do anything, even breathe, because the throat is choked up like that. So it's not an advantageous time for focusing oneself in Krishna consciousness and chanting and remembering like that. So better to die now. What do you think? Are you ready? Do you want to make that prayer? Just hang on, Krishna, just a little later. Something like that. Well, maybe you've had the experience of getting a serious disease, which, wasn't really clear what's going to happen. I remember I had 2 skin cancer spots. And it was in like 30 years ago. It was more than 30 years ago. Anyway, it was about 30 years ago. And so, I was sort of middle age, and physically things were not too bad. But I got these spots, and they cut them out in Joburg Gen, would you believe? The Joburg General Hospital, for I think nothing, or maybe it was 5 rands or something. And then they said, yeah, we have to analyze them, see what they are, see if they're cancer or not. And I said, well, when will we get the results? They said, a couple of weeks. It was the first time, because, cancer, it makes you think. As it turned out, it was not malignant, and, I've still got the scars, they're still there. And, nothing's happened with them further. But I must say, when I finally got the results that it's okay, it's not dangerous, I did breathe a sigh, a breath of relief. That's good. Because I had this idea, it may interrupt my life severely, but no, now I can carry on with my life. Hare Krishna. So, but one time, it will be the last time, actually, for all of us. And we don't know when it's going to be. Therefore, it's recommended, and Prabhupada said so many times, that we should live every day as if it's going to be our last. It doesn't mean in some sort of fearful state that, death may be here in a couple of hours. But it just means, what it means is that we're focused in Krishna consciousness. Because that's what being ready for these things, that's what it means. Rather than, okay, I got through that disease or whatever. And according to the law of averages, the law of averages is a very dangerous thing. According to the law of averages, if I've got good medical care and generally keep active and so on, I should live to be about 80. So, time check, how many years to go? Oh yeah, I've still got 20, 30, 40, whatever it may be, 50. So it's okay. But the law of averages is dangerous because not everyone is average. Yeah. Some go further than 80, but quite a number don't make it. And who knows? Who knows what's going to happen to us? So yes, so it's emphasized, Prabhupada emphasized, that devotees should live their lives, live every day as if it may be their last, actually. But for the materialists, because for the materialists, death is just like the sum total of negativity. And in the meantime, before that time, in the meantime, for them to really get into their material life and make the most of it and be as successful as they possibly could and ultimately enjoy life as much as they possibly could. They don't want to have this thing hanging over their heads that, I may die today, although they may, and one day they will. Are you familiar with the story of the sword of Damocles? Is that the right pronunciation? Damocles, you know that story? You don't know that story? It's a good one. Sure. Kind of old Greek, or, I don't know, probably Greek. Damocles was the king, and there was someone who was envious of him, being the king and being wealthy and, powerful and all these things, like a sort of classic medieval king. And so Damocles, the king, found out that there's this person, and he wanted to help him to understand the reality that being king is not just a life of enjoyment and wealth and just endless sense gratification, but there's great danger in being a king. So he invited the person for lunch, I think it was lunch, and he had a sword placed over his head, and it was hanging, the sword was hanging with sharp edge down just over his head. It's the sword of Damocles. And the fellow was invited and came, and Damocles, the king, said, "Oh, so you want to become the king? Well, look at my position. You see my position. Do you want that?" And the fellow said, "Well, actually, I think I'll just carry on as I am." Because that's the story of the sword of Damocles, approximately. Yeah. Because it's extremely dangerous to be a king. At least in the past, when kings were actual Kshatriyas and they would have to fight, and they generally wanted to anyway, but they would have to, otherwise they couldn't remain as king, then the majority of kings did not die of old age. Yeah, the majority of them died even they had to go into battle when they're elderly and, against young men who are really strong. And there's even one story I heard of one king who became blind, but he still went into battle because he felt, I'm the king, I have to do it. And he was killed because he was blind. Yes, so, generally kings, at least in the classic sense, don't worry about King Charles. If there's anybody who doesn't have to worry about being killed in battle, it's probably him. He'll be away in some secure place. Anyway, who knows? Yes, but generally they wouldn't die of old age. And so many of them would die just in middle age. Very common. And not die of diseases. Not so common. Yes, right. So, and let me just read a little bit of the purport here. This is, the book was translated by Prabhupada, but part of the commentaries or the purports, or some, or maybe all of them, but at least some, were written by his disciples. So it says here, of all the verses of the Mukundamala Stotra, this one was the most beloved of Srila Prabhupada. He frequently quoted it and sang it as a bhajan. There is, if you've got a big enough collection of Prabhupada's songs, you'll find it. It's there. Prabhupada singing just this verse, not the whole thing. So he frequently quoted it and sang it as a bhajan. And the verse we're reading today, verse 13, it's there in a purport. On one of the first record albums His Divine Grace produced, he sang this shloka as a complete song. Devotees who served Srila Prabhupada often heard him sing it as he went about his daily activities, or sometimes alone in his room. He also quoted it many times in his purports. Yes. And he's explaining it. He gives a quite elaborate explanation in the purport to the second verse of the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So anyway, the idea is, well, it's a prayer. This verse is a prayer that let me die when I am capable as capable as possible in terms of, my system, material system. Let me die when I'm in as capable a condition as possible, because then there's the greatest possibility of actually being able to deal with it successfully and go back home, back to Godhead. And even Prabhupada mentions here, well, it's going to be discussed in some of the following verses. It is thoroughly described in the following verses how one can voluntarily give up his body and return home back to Godhead. The yogic process practiced by Prithu Maharaj at the time of death accelerates the giving up of this body while one is in sound health physically and mentally. Every devotee desires to give up the body while the body, is sound physically and mentally. Every devotee. You're one of every devotee, aren't you? I think we're all amongst all of the devotees. So we should bear this in mind and not just become preoccupied with this whole idea, which is so common. I get sick, let me get through. Then once I'm through, then I forget about physical problems. Now I'm just going to go on living and having a good time. And we must be aware of that in the context of Krishna consciousness too. Yes, and a perfect yogi can give up his body or her body whenever he or she desires through the practice of yoga. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Any comments, questions?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you for such a wonderful class. A few years ago I was, I don't know whether to say fortunate or unfortunate to be present while a devotee was about to leave their body. And we were singing kirtan, but the devotee was just out of it, and they were engrossed by a fear I've never seen before. So is there a particular mindset or a mood that we need to imbibe so that we don't become that afraid of death when the time comes?
What was the offense?
No, there was no offense. I was just saying.
I just didn't hear that.
I was saying the devotee was engrossed in fear.
Fear.
Yeah, they were very fearful. Yeah.
Okay.
Even though kirtan was going on, and they shortly left the body after that.
They did, actually.
Yeah. So my question is there a particular mood or mindset that we need to imbibe while we're still healthy that can help us at the time of death?
Sure, right. Well, one thing which has become more apparent to me at least is that as one gets older, I remember when I turned 40, we were at the beach. And I thought, gosh, according to the law of averages, I'm halfway there. Interesting. But then when you reach 70-something, then it's kind of like countdown time. You can't really say, I've got 1/10 of my life left. I mean, you don't know, but it could be less, could be a little more. But the thing is, it seems to become apparent that, it's not going to be like the end, and just lights out and finished. But, Prabhupada did emphasize many times that life is a continuum, and it's already been a continuum through this life, and according to our teachings, it is going to continue being a continuum through the time of death, and that it is going to come. And particularly when you're older, then you realize it is actually going to come, and it's going to come not in a long time, in a relatively short period of time. And so one becomes more able to accept it as just one of those things that one is going to go through, have to go through, you could say, but just go through. So, but anyway, we should try to imbibe that sort of understanding. And if we do, then when the time of death actually comes, and assuming we're in a situation where we know that actually it's going to happen and I'm actually not going to get better, if it's some serious disease or something like that, then one has to just accept reality and just carry on as much as one can and ask the devotees, please help me, and just sort of stick with it. But really, the thing is it's like to really try and assimilate the teaching, the relevant teachings about that phenomenon, the phenomenon of death, absorb them and really assimilate them and accept them, and not accept them in a sort of theoretical sense, but have a whole other aspect of your consciousness which has this idea or hope, at least, that I'm just going to carry on. This body is just going to carry on. Yes, as one gets older, one gets different physical conditions, and they, one by one, they stop getting better. Normally when you're young or even middle-aged, you get some sort of something happens and you get better. And so you feel that, something is coming, or I get some disease or something, and it'll get better also. But at a certain point you see that things are not getting better. You get them, you didn't have them, now you got it, and you see it's actually not getting better. Yeah, there's a famous book by a Russian author, which I've got it here somewhere. Ravindra Swarup comments on the death of a particular person. A particular person living in a family situation gets a serious disease, and it becomes apparent that it's not going to get better. It's just steadily getting worse, and the doctors can't do anything. I should look that up. He says that devotees should read it. So what can we do? Well, the main thing we can do is adjust our thinking in terms of the philosophy. So the philosophy is not just some ideas, and my life is kind of like a different thing, but the philosophy is just an explanation of the reality of my life. And then, in order to really assimilate that, you have to develop some spiritual strength. Otherwise, as the devotee or person you mentioned, devotee, if they haven't assimilated it and accepted it, they won't be able to hold on to the conviction at that time. They'll become overwhelmed by the material, sort of usual material feelings of this body must go on. Yeah. So that's what I'd say. Second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and there are other places too. Story of Ajamil, there's some interesting points there. And really, because like Prabhupada we just read from the purport by one of his disciples, he was regularly singing this particular verse, which is actually a request for death. Let me die, please, now. And not like, well, you know, I'm old enough and strong enough, I can do so many things, so why should I die? But more like, it's a good time to die because I'm more